Okay, happy Monday. Dan here, and I want to look at GameStop today. This is definitely not my typical trade, but if I see something, if I see an interesting situation, I'll go ahead and pass it along to you guys. And so this stock is like sloppy, choppy, crappy, yucky. It has been for quite a while, ever since I think it was Melvin Capital or some dude like that got his ass handed to him by Raging Kitty and his guys. Personally, I kind of like that when a hedge fund dude is short a stock that's $1. Um, okay, whatever. Anyway, so I want to get back to this rather than editorializing. So we'll look at the daily chart here, and you can see this thing had been trying to get above the 200-day moving average and even failed on Friday and then Thursday. So this has really been formidable resistance. Bam, here, didn't make it here, and then finally here for last week. So look at this volume here. It's like massive volume just today. All right, so that'll get my attention as an active trader. So, you can look at this momentum indicator that I use. This is also, we like the gray lines. We like them even better when they turn green. They just have to be a little bit higher than that. But we'll look and see why this actually did what it did because it kind of sets up our trade for tomorrow. And if you look at this, like this is 25 bucks here. This is 24 bucks here. So this isn't like this big, massively volatile stock. You can trade this. You can trade this, but I want to show you this on a four-window multi-time frame analysis. So this is just a 5-minute chart from today. And let me just go just regular hours. So this kind of cleans things up a little bit. So this is a chart for today. It pops up a little bit, and then magically, right around here at around 11:45, this thing starts taking off. So what was it that made this happen? It was because Michael Burry of what is it, the short seller? So I forget the name, but it's a hell of a movie with Steve Carell. Um, I should be able to remember that, but maybe I'm just getting old. Hell of a movie. I like the alligator in the pool. So, anyway, right about here, he came out and said, "Yeah, I've been buying it." But then, subsequent to that, then he actually did come back and say that he was really kind of buying it more as an investment. But that doesn't matter with the Wall Street bet gang and other people that follow this kind of stuff, especially with this pedigree um, back here of this stock just screaming and just killing people. So people will love to come back to the well one more time. That's what I think's happening here. You can see this canary or orange or yellow line, whatever you want to call it. This is the volume weighted average price line. And the idea is when the stock, and this is just intraday stuff, when the stock is above this line, that indicates that buyers are coming in. Like buyers are wanting this stock. It pulls back to this particular level. They suck up all the supply and then they push it up a bit. And then they go, okay, that's enough. And then the stock pulls back down to that same general area, and then the buyers are coming in again. So that's what we like to see. All right, so you saw this after the Burry announcement, though. Notice that before that announcement, this thing had gapped up and then was under severe selling pressure. So once it does this, boom, that really puts a whole new dynamic onto the stock. And then it just continues to run, right? Well, at some point, the buying kind of peters out. It just trades sideways and then starts to trade down a bit. So, what do we do tomorrow on this? Well, there could be a good trade here, or there could be no trade at all. This is the way that I would trade this. I look at this range right here. This is like in no man's land. Um, it's like here. It's yellow. we you need to be careful when it's in this range. If because this stock will be highly watched tomorrow, the high was 25.01. So by the way, do you think people were in this stock going like, if this bad boy goes up to 25, I'm ditching it all? Yeah. That's why I look at this 25 level as being a real serious wall that you don't want to be messing around with. And what I mean by that is you can say, well, I'm going to buy it now in anticipation because then when it breaks through this ceiling, then I'm going to make a lot of money. Well, that's a lot of words that don't mean anything good. First of all, when you say when, you're really on thin ice. You can say, I will buy this stock when and if it breaks through a particular pivot point and then my alert is triggered, that is when I would buy the stock. But if instead you're using when as just like I'm predicting that this is going to happen, I'm just telling you, man, you may be proven right in that prediction, and that just reinforces something that you really don't want to be doing. So let's not do that. So this is my suggestion. If the stock doesn't trade above 25 in the morning, then just kind of move on. Go ahead and set your alert like I did. But if it doesn't trade over 25 in the morning, then there's just no trade here. Just go ahead and move on to something else. But if it does, that's when you can buy the stock because like nobody's been in at this level here since last October. So this, for all intents and purposes, is just blue sky. I mean, when the stock's up here, then it trades all the way down here, okay? Way back when, October. Then it's traded all this area here. You can't really assume that there's anybody who bought up here and is unhappy and just got to sell the stock. You can't assume that they haven't taken advantage of this and panicked out and said, GameStop, schmamestop, I got to get out of here. We'll rename GameStop to PainStop. So they've already gotten out of this stock, meaning that if the stock, notice I didn't say when, if the stock runs above 25, you're probably going to see 1, 2, or 3 points higher, which on a percentage basis, that kind of matters. Okay, so that's it. Members get to the strategy session from a live session today. I covered a lot of different things about trading styles and tactics and mindset games that you're not really going to hear anywhere else. So I think it's from what the comments that I was making or the comments that I was getting indicate the stuff that I talked about really resonated with people today. So definitely take advantage of that. And if you're not a member of Stock Market Mentor, you might want to check it out. Okay. All right. That's all I got for you. See you all next time.